over the weekend, there was some leaks that we got about Pokemon. And while a lot of this stuff is pretty much par for the course when it comes to these sort of things, there were some stories that were coming out of the developer that I would say gets people to raise an eyebrow, to put it lightly. This article from Games Radar is talking about it because this is interesting, some of the stories that they're coming up with in relation to the history of Pokemon, so to speak. Enormous Pokemon leak reportedly includes the JRPG series' entire origin myth, alongside a short story that may have ruined Typhlosion forever. And there was actually several short stories that were in relation to the history of Pokemon. This article is more specifically talking about Typhlosion. Over the weekend, an enormous amount of supposedly leaked information about both old and new Pokemon games began surfacing on social media, seemingly including beta sprites, concept art, and allegedly even the source code for both Pokemon Legends Z through A, and even the unannounced Gen 10 games. Apparently, and amongst all of their stories detailing how the entire Pokemon universe began, as well as what looks like folk tales about relationships between humans and Pokemon. And I think that's actually a good way to define these or to describe these. The comparison I've heard before on social media is the Grimm fairy tales, and these stories that they have very much strike me like Grimm fairy tales, and I mean that in the truest sense, in that they're typical fairy tales, but they have a really dark and sometimes disturbing tone to these stories. As for the human Pokemon relationship stories, though, there's a reason why the beloved second generation starter Pokemon Typhlosion is trending on Twitter right now. The alleged story in question details a human girl becoming the wife of a fire type and even having its child. And unfortunately, whether it's actually real or not, well, it's obviously not real because it's Pokemon and it's all made up, but I get what they're saying, whether it's canon or not. It seems like that the image of Typhlosion may have been permanently ruined for many. Much like Vaporeon, it feels like the old Johto region star may have become a Pokemon that many will refrain from calling a favorite. I do like how they brought up Vaporeon in this whole thing. The way I kind of look at this is it's kind of like an actor when they're performing a character or something like that. Because a lot of times there might be something in the script or in the story that talks about the character's backstory and other things like that. But actors, they also try to create their own backstories themselves too, not necessarily contradicting what's established in the script or the official story, but, just kind of filling in the gaps in order to try to better inform their performance as that. And what we're seeing right now, it seems like it's something that's not necessarily meant to be taken as canon or Pokemon lore, but just something for the developers of it to kind of use to help inform the decisions they make, unless it's later, I wouldn't say retconned, or until it's later established as something else is the official lore. But some of the stories that are going around on social media is this story right here talking about the Typhlosion. I'm going to leave a link to this post in the description of this video below if you want to read the whole thing, because it's kind of long, so I'm not going to read everything, but just a little bit of it right here towards the end, because basically, to sum up the story, a woman is lost in the woods. She comes across a handsome looking man who takes her back to his cave where they end up living a life together. He asks her to gather firewood for her. They go back to the cave to fall asleep. As winter approached, Bakufan dug deep into the cave and said to the girl, "Go and gather some firewood, break off the top branches of the tallest trees you can find." And it says right here, Bakufan is Japanese for Typhlosion. So it says she couldn't reach top branches. He says, if you don't get those, we're going to be seen. As the snow began to fall, the two of them slept in the depths of the deepening hole, so the cave that they live in. There was plenty of food. I woke up every now and then to eat and then to sleep again. One day, the girl woke up to find a child in her arms. After several days and nights had passed, the girl woke up and Bakufan said, "Your father was looking for you." And then he goes out to encounter the father. The father kills him. To which they both go back to the village where the girl is initially from. The girl's father built a hut on the outskirts of the village and put the girl and her child in it. Eventually, spring came. The young men in the village often teased and abused the girl and her child. It got worse day by day, and at one point, they tried to cover it up with the fur of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The girl returned home and complained to her parents about the villagers, how they're teasing her and basically harassing her because her child is a cross between human and a Pokemon. Even though the parents tried to explain it, the people in the village would not listen. On the contrary, he became even more amused and covered the girl and child with Tyrannosaurus furs. Not a very good parent, if you ask me. Kills her husband, who's a Pokemon, and then does this. The girl and the child then howled loudly and disappeared into the depths of the forest. The two never returned. That's how people found out Bakufun is half human and basically a Typhlosion. So that's the story you get there. Comes across as, like I said, typical grim fairy tale, tragic ending or a bad ending, has disturbing elements to it. And whatever it is, what it is. There's other stories like that too. One about a Slackoth, about how a woman was basically forcibly impregnated by a Slack King because her and her friends were abusive to Slackoths. So after that happened, she gave birth to a Slackoth, and then she was better to them or something like that. Not necessarily the most pleasant thing, and something you certainly wouldn't expect to see in Pokemon. That's what other articles are talking about here. This one right here from The Gamer, the Game Freak leak reveals a much darker side of Pokemon. And this is pointing out a lot of the stuff I already went over about how their information was leaked from them and how people started discovering these stories about Pokemon. Many of the reportedly leaked snippets draw from real world mythology. That's something I think important to also point out, because especially when it comes to the Typhlosion, that's heavily inspired by the Tanuki, because Typhlosion is like a badger. A Tanuki is either like a raccoon dog or like a Japanese badger. And in their folklore, Tanuki is mischievous. It also is a shapeshifter and other things like that, similar to the story that we got, which makes sense when you consider how Pokemon has constructed its lore over the years, but never has Pokemon been depicted in such a mature and brutal manner. I'm not saying Pokemon has always been 100% innocent. Yeah, when you just look at stuff like this, it sure seems that way, but there has been some disturbing elements to Pokemon in the past. This thing from Game Rant, for instance, it just was published last month, but it's talking about some of the more disturbing entries in Pokemon or the Pokedex. Some say this Pokemon is a collection of souls burdened with regrets, silently drifting through the dusk. With the mouth of its belly, Dusknoir swallows its target whole. The soul is the only thing eaten. Dusknoir disgorges the body before departing. That's actually pretty disturbing right there. When its life comes to an end, it absorbs the life energy of every living thing and turns into a cocoon once more. A kick from the hardened tips of this Pokemon's legs leaves a wound in the opponent's body and soul that will never heal. It's always with the soul. Polo Sand is known as the beach nightmare. It pulls its prey down into the sand by controlling the sand by itself, and then it sucks out their souls. You see what I mean? With a voice like a human child, it cries out to lure adults deep into the forest, getting them lost amongst the trees. Yep, that's the kind of stuff that we see from the Pokédex. So, like I was saying, this isn't talking about like inbreeding or whatever, or like bestiality or something, whatever you want to define Pokemon as, whether they're animals or just like another species that's comparable to humans. It's not talking about like mixed breeding and other stuff like that, but still, these are some pretty dark elements that it is getting to with these stories that we're getting from Game Freak. So I can see why some people were saying like, okay, that's not necessarily the best look for them. Pokemon is primarily marketed towards a young audience who can pick up each new game and feel welcome. Every Pokemon game is somebody's first, and Nintendo and Game Freak have stuck to that philosophy, even if it stifles innovation at every turn. Okay, so that's pretty much it. And when it comes to this sort of thing, like a lot of people looking at this are saying like, okay, the developers are a bunch of gooners and things like that. And I can definitely see where they're getting that from. Well, like I was saying before, this just kind of strikes me as them trying to establish a more in-depth and more, I'm going to say realistic, but more, I would say realistic in the sense that it's kind of like the fairy tales and lore from our actual real life world, some of the stories that we have in the past. It seems like that's what they were trying to go for, to, flesh out the whole Pokemon universe, or at least in their minds, how they would have imagined some of the stories would have been passed around for the characters living within this world. So because of that, I don't really have a problem with it. I think the biggest issue from something like this and from this information getting out is the actual gooners online who are going to start creating fan fiction and other deviant art type stuff featuring Typhlosion and humans and other things like that. But we have seen in the past that lore like this isn't going to stop them. There's plenty of, I would say, disturbing art that people have created over the years in relation to Pokemon and humans, and even just Pokemon and other stuff like that. Maybe this is just going to, in their minds, give them a seal of approval. Like, okay, they're confirming this is real, so now we can start doing this sort of thing. So obviously that's kind of a degeneracy that I don't necessarily encourage, and I don't usually consume that kind of media. But when it comes to this type of stories right here, I think it's fine for what it is. It's nothing to get hung up about, because like I was saying, it's not like they're trying to put this out as the established lore. It's just something that in the minds of the game developers to help kind of further flesh out the world in their minds. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. Do you agree with me? Do you think it's being taken out of proportion, or do you think I'm completely wrong on this one? Comment below, let me know. And if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to click that like button and share this video out there, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.